Okay, now I'm doing break even. Now, the worst case scenario that could happen to you is you could end up getting one of the finance things, profit and loss, cash flow, or balance sheet, plus break even. Sometimes they put break even in alongside one of the finance things in the exam. So you have to be good at break even. You can't just sit there and go, I can't be bothered. It didn't come up last year. So it's very important for you to get involved and do this. Okay. Right, a few key things about break even before we start. You have to know about different sort of costs for break even. You have to know about what I'm going to zoom in a wee bit so my handwriting's not terrible. You ought to know what a fixed cost is. And you need to know what a variable cost is. The third thing you need to know is what revenue means. And as long as you know those three things, you're pretty much set. So, a fixed cost is a cost that does not change with output. So as output increases, that cost stays exactly the same. An example of that would be like paying for a factory. A variable cost is as you make more of a product, so as output increases, the cost goes up. An example would be cost of materials. So with Mars bars, every time you make another Mars bar, you need more caramel, and you need all the other stuff. The third thing is revenue, and revenue is just simply money in. To make revenue, it's how much you sell it for, so the selling price, times by how many products you sell. So, if your selling price was £1 and you sold 10 products, it'd be £1 times 10, and you'd end up getting £10. Right, and that would be your revenue. Once you know that, that's all you actually need to know. And if you actually look at a break even, it's a really, really simple thing they're doing here. Right, okay. They always give you information. You have to look at all the information. It says Joe has 20 boats and his business is open for 60 hours per week, right? It says he charges £10 an hour for the use of his boats. Okay. Now, sometimes they'll be really nice and they'll already give you a lot of the break-even stuff. They've already given you the revenue and they've already given you the total costs. Now, they're the two things. If you've got them, you don't need anything else. Because remember, total costs is fixed costs plus variable costs. So you don't even need to have put those in. They've made it really easy. Oh, no, wait, I'm lying. They want you to do it. So they want you, first of all, to say what his fixed costs are. Is there anything up there which tells you what his fixed costs are? Now, there's no information about it, so how are you going to work it out? You're going to work it out because it's going to be along here. This is going to be the line. And you might be thinking, and you always have to write fixed costs there. How do I know that's right? I'll show you why. Because total costs always have to be starting where fixed costs start. Because total costs are fixed costs plus variable costs. So when there's been no rentals, his total cost must have been 2,000 because his variable cost would be nothing because he wasn't making any products. So it started up there. So that means it must be his fixed cost along there. I hope you understand that, but tell me if you don't. Okay. It now says, what is his total revenue when he breaks even? Now you remember, break even is when your revenue equals your costs. So where does it cross? It crosses here, so I'm going to dot down here, and his total revenue would be... Right, so it's not easy when they do this, okay? So it said he'll break even when he sells 300 products. So how much revenue does he get when he breaks even? You dot this way, and he'll get 3,000. So that's how much money he'll get in when he breaks even. Then it said how much profit would Joe make if he rent out boats for £600 600 hours a week. So we've got 600 here. How much profit would he make at this point? Right, if you dot up here, his cost would be 4,000. His revenue would be 6,000. So if his revenue, which is money in, is 6,000, and his costs are 4,000, he must be making £2,000 profit. So that's the answer. Right, here's the second one. And now we're talking about Ali and his juice bar. Okay, so he only uses fresh fruit, it turns out, which is processed into a healthy drink. That's very exciting, right? It's the same old stuff. This time they're giving you the fixed costs and the total costs. They haven't given you the total revenue, and that's the number you're going to need. Right, it says, always with these things, underline anything that might be useful. There's nothing useful at the top bit at all, but there is a bit saying here, the drinks sell for £1 per glass. Draw and label the total revenue line for Ali's business. Well, if he gets £1 in every time he sells a product, how much money will he get if he sells nothing? He will get nothing. So you'd start there. And to make this really quick on yourself, all you've got to do is say how much money would he make at the maximum amount of drinks. So if he sold 1,200 drinks and he sells each one for £1, what's the amount of money he'll get? He'll get £1,200. So if we go there. Now here, I want to draw a line. Hopefully I can do a posh line. Yeah, I can. From, oh, that didn't work very well, did it? Don't go away. Let's start again. That's rubbish, isn't it? This is useless. Can I move it? Oh, here we are. Oh, no. Jesus. Yes, there we are. Good. Right, I've done my line. That's the amount of, and I would call it, if you don't do this, you'll lose a mark. I'd call that total revenue. Now, all I've done there is I've done the amount of money he'll make if he sells nothing, which is nothing. And I've gone straight up to how much money he'd make if he sold all the products. 1,200, he'd get £1,200. Because it was 1,200 times how much he'd sell it for, which is £1. Okay, so where does he break even? It's where those two lines cross. So you could, if you wanted, how many glasses would he have to sell? I'm going to get a little dotted line from that point. It's not ideal, but it's there. He'd have to sell 800 to break even, right? Now moving on. Oh, that's really annoying. Really, that's ridiculously annoying. Don't go away. Move that back up. Right. How much profit or loss would he be making if he sold 1,200 juices? Right. How can you find that out? At 1,200, his cost will be this amount, which is, I think, it's 1,000. So his cost will be 1,000, and his revenue will be 1,200. So how much money will he be making in profit? He'll be making £200 profit because his revenue is higher than his cost. His money in is higher than his money out. Okay, we're getting there here. Now, what you have to do is, whenever you get a break-even, now this is a break-even when they're going to ask you to do all the lines yourself. One key thing you're going to do with a break-even is you're not going to spend 45 minutes of the exam doing it. Because if you spend that long, you'll end up screwing over the rest of your exam. So just accept that if you can't do it, and it takes you ages, give your best go in a short amount of time, and then say, right, I'm done, and go on to the next question. But you've got to give it a real go. Okay, so all I do first of all is I get the key numbers that I'll need. So what does it say? His fixed costs are £300 per night. So already I've got 300 written down, and I put fixed costs. Right. It says each guest will cost them £5 per night. So that means their variable cost must be £5, because every time they have an extra guest, it's going to cost them £5. The next thing I'm going to know is they charge their guests £20 per night. So that's how much money they get in every time they sell one guest. Now I've got those numbers now, and that was your selling price. With those numbers, I can do all the calculations. Right, first of all, it says give an example of variable costs. Explain why this cost is a variable cost. Right, an example for a guest house would be soap. You could say it could be anything that every time a guest comes in, you'll have to have a new one of it. So I'd say soap would be a good one. So this is a variable cost because a variable cost increases with output, and you'd say as there's more guests who come in, they're going to have to increase the amount of soap. You could also argue that an easy one would be the breakfast ingredients, because every time a person comes in, they have to give them more breakfast. Right, on to the next bit. Here, now I don't ever want you to use this. This is it says you may use this grid to help you, but it won't be marked. This is what will waste your time, so don't spend any time using that grid. It's pointless. We don't use it, we're better than that. This is for a bunch of jokers, right? Let's go on to the next page. Okay, what were those numbers we had? We had his fixed costs being 300. His variable cost was £5. And his selling price was £20. Right, okay. They now want us to try and do the break-even graph all ourselves, so we'd have to fill in all these numbers, right? To be honest, I think this is fairly easy once you've got those three numbers, but I'm going to do the quick version for you and just see what you think of it. Right, first of all, you always do your fixed cost first because they're the easiest. Get a ruler. I'm not going to bother, but you get a ruler, and you draw 300 across like that. You'll get 1 mark for doing that and a second mark for calling that a fixed cost. Now we know that goes across at 300 because the more they make, it stays the same because it's fixed. Right, next we've got to draw the variable cost line. Right, so the variable cost line is really quick. Do not think about plotting every single part on it because you haven't got time for that. Let's make it really nice and easy on you. Start off with the variable cost is £5. Now if they sold no products, how much would the variable cost be? It'd be nothing. They wouldn't have to pay anything because they haven't sold anything. Rather than plotting every single one of these and doing 5 times 5, 10 times 5 and doing little dotted lines across the way, I go straight to the end and go 25 times 5. If he had 25 guests, what would his variable cost be? And that would be 25 times 5, which is 125. So I'll just get to that, which is around about there, right? And then I just draw a line to that point and call that variable cost. Right, now I've got the variable cost and fixed costs, I'm able to find the total costs, which is just simply the two numbers put together. And there's a really quick way of doing this. All you do is you look at the 2 points. At 0, his variable cost was 0, and his fixed cost was 300. So that means his total cost must have been 300, those two numbers put together. Now we're going to go to the end bit. At 25, his variable costs were 125. His fixed costs were 300. So his total costs must equal 425. Okay, so all I've got to do is go up to here and do a little X here and join those two numbers together like that. But you'll know you've done right because these two numbers, the variable costs and the total costs, are parallel to each other. Right, we've only got one more line to go for, and that's his selling price, to find out what his revenue line should be. Now remember, if he sold nothing, his revenue would be nothing, so it'd be down by here. That's the first part. But what if he was to sell all the number of guests he can, which is 25? It'd be 25 times 20. Is everyone happy with that? So that would be 500. That's the most amount of money you can make, because 25... Oh, get your calculator out for this. There's no point being smug at this point, so just get your calculator out. It is 20 times 25 equals... Yeah, it's 500. So all I do is do a dot here at 500. Whoops. I'll do this in a different colour. Up here. And if he sells nothing, he's down here. So I draw my line between those two numbers. Oh, it's rubbish. There's total revenue. Now, if I'd drawn those lines properly, I think the number of guests comes out at 20. But you dot down here. And what's my problem? Why have I got it wrong? Why have I not got quite the right number of guests? It's because all my lines are squiggly. Do you mean? They're just a bit rubbish. And this is a really good point for your exam. If you don't get your ruler out on this one, you're going to end up losing a mark because you could have got it right, but you just haven't done quite good enough lines. Okay, just for anyone who just wants to be able to check that they're right, there is an equation you can do to do break even, which is a lot quicker than doing the graph. And that equation is, you put fixed costs on top, and then on the bottom you put selling price minus variable costs, and you do that calculation, and you'll end up getting, now you've got to do them in brackets because you've got to do that first, and you'll end up getting what the break even is. So the fixed cost is 300, over, the selling price was 20, minus variable costs which were 5. So that could be, instead of putting it like that, it could be 300 over 15. And if you actually do that calculation, the break even ends up being 20 guests. So sometimes, I'm not saying a lot of you are going to do that, but you could do that equation later to check that you're right. But basically, as long as you've done your lines better than mine, you'll get it as 20. Okay, can you now try and do that on your own and see whether you can actually do it? Right, the last question, which is still worth a mark. How much profit will he make if the guest house is full? Now, 25 is his full guest house. At that point, his costs are, if you look up here, his costs, if I'd done it right, were 425. Oops. And his revenue was 500. So how much profit would have he made? He'd have been making £75 profit if his guest house was full.